The event was called the Austin Innovators Gala. That's irony for you. I was standing there in a borrowed suit that smelled like someone else's cologne, feeling like a block of uncarved wood in a room full of plastic. My wife, Melissa, was up on stage, bathed in a spotlight, accepting some award for brand synergy or whatever hollow term they invented this week. That's when he walked up. Kevin, Herr Workprotege. He was all teeth and a $900 haircut. He smirked, looked at my glass of whiskey, and then at me, having fun. Big guy. Before I could answer, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a crumpled $1 bill, and flicked it right into my glass. Whiskey splashed onto my hand. Here, he said, his voice loud enough for the people nearby to hear. A tip for the craftsman. Go buy yourself something real. My eyes locked on his. Then, I looked past him. Across the room. Melissa was watching. She saw the dollar. She saw my face. And then, she smiled. A tight, thin smile, and she turned back to the applause. That was it. That was the moment. I didn't say a word. I didn't wipe the whiskey off my hand. I just stood there for a beat, letting the chatter of the room rush back in. Then, slowly, I reached my fingers into the glass and pulled out the soaking wet $1 bill. I placed my drink on a passing tray. I unfolded the bill, smoothing it out between my thumb and forefinger. I folded it once, neatly, and slipped it into the breast pocket of my borrowed suit. I looked right at Kevin. I didn't threaten him. I didn't raise my voice. I just nodded. Once, then I turned around and walked out. I walked past the tables, past the bar, past the stage where Melissa was still laughing and holding her glass trophy. I didn't look back. I just kept walking. Through the marble lobby, past the confused-looking valets, and into the parking garage. The drive home was silent. I didn't turn on the radio. The only sound was the hum of my truck's engine on the highway. There was no rage, no fire. The anger I expected to feel just wasn't there. It had been replaced by something else. Something cold and quiet and terribly clear. It was the feeling you get when you've been working on a complex piece of joinery for days, and you finally see the one single, perfect cut you have to make. It wasn't a breakdown. It was an awakening. I got home just before midnight. The house was dark and quiet. This house, the one I bought with my own money, 5 years before I ever met Melissa, the one she always called too rustic and lacking curb appeal. I didn't go to the bedroom. I went to the kitchen, pulled out my phone, and Googled 24-hour locksmith Austin. A man named Miguel showed up at 1:15 a.m. He looked tired but professional. Just the 3 exterior doors. I told him. Deadbolts and handle sets. Everything. Tough night, he asked, pulling his drill out of a case. Just a security upgrade. I said. I stood there and watched him work. The high-pitched whine of the drill cutting through the 2 a.m. silence was the most satisfying sound I'd ever heard. Zzz-dunk. Zzz-dunk. Each screw being driven home was a punctuation mark. The end of a sentence, the end of a chapter. By 2:30 a.m., he was done. That'll be $450, he said, wiping his hand. I paid him in cash, and he handed me a small, shiny new set of keys. I held them in my palm. They felt heavy, solid, real. Thanks. Miguel, you have a good night. You too. Boss. He left. I locked the new front deadbolt. The click was beautiful, sharp and final. I walked to the kitchen table and placed Miguel's itemized invoice directly in the center, right where she'd see it. Then, I took my new key, walked out the back door, locked it from the outside, and went to my workshop. I went to the only place that had ever made sense. I flicked on the lights to my workshop. The long, fluorescent bulbs hummed for a second and then flooded the space with clean, honest light. The smell hit me first, not the stale cloud of expensive perfume, hairspray, and spilled champagne that clung to me from the party. This was the smell of my life. Cedar, white pine, the sharp tang of turpentine and boiled linseed oil, the dusty, sweet smell of sawdust. It was the smell of things that are real, things you can touch. I walked over to my main workbench. On top of it sat a massive slab of white oak, its edges still raw from the sawmill. I was in the middle of turning it into a dining table for a client up in Dallas. I ran my calloused hand over the unfinished edge, feeling the rough grain. The weight of it. This was my anchor. This was reality. I had spent 20 years of my life building things that last, solid, functional, beautiful things that would outlive me. And I had spent 20 years married to a woman who built nothing but brand strategies and social status. Things made of smoke and buzzwords. I looked at my hands. They were stained, with small cuts on the knuckles and sawdust permanently embedded in the lines of my palms. Melissa had always hated my hands. She was constantly buying me expensive soaps, exfoliating scrubs, telling me to clean myself up before her friends came over, as if my work was something dirty, something to be hidden away. My mind went to the $80,000, her student loan debt, from a degree she never even used. I paid it off in a lump sum 2 years after we were married. With money I'd saved since I was a teenager. We're a team. Josh, she'd said, kissing me. Now we can finally start our life. I thought about the $50,000 I'd given her 7 years ago. The seed money to help her and her partner launch their PR firm. I'd cashed out stock I'd inherited from my grandfather. I never saw a penny of it back. When I'd asked about it a year ago, she'd laughed. Oh, Josh, that was just a minor loan. Look at what I've built. I thought about all the years I'd stood quietly in the corner at her parties. Introduced as my husband, Joshua. He makes furniture. She'd say it with the same enthusiasm you'd use to describe a quaint, slightly embarrassing hobby. Like building ships in a bottle. I thought about Kevin's laugh. But mostly, I thought about Melissa's smile. It wasn't a wince. It wasn't embarrassment. It was agreement. Psychologists have a name for it. Contempt. I'd read an article about it years ago. About the 4 horsemen of a relationship. Contempt, they said, was the #1 predictor of divorce. It's not just anger, which is about the action. It's not criticism, which is about the person. Contempt is different. It's the deep-seated, rotting belief that the other person is beneath you. It's disgust. That's what I'd seen in her eyes. Not, I can't believe he did that. It was, I can't believe I'm related to this. The crumpled dollar bill in my pocket suddenly felt heavier. It wasn't a joke. It was a summary. It was the final balance on a ledger that had been in the red for a very, very long time. My thoughts were cut by the sound of a high-performance engine turning into the driveway. Headlights swept across the workshop windows. A car door slammed. 4:03 a.m. I heard the jingle of keys at the front door. Then silence. Then the jingle again. More frantic. I heard her fumbling. The sound of metal scraping against the new lock plate. Then, a pause. Joshua, her voice was sharp. Annoyed. Thump. 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 Joshua, what the hell is wrong with this door? Open it. I walked out of my workshop, through the dark kitchen, and to the front foyer. The pounding was vibrating the door in its frame. Joshua, I'm not kidding. Open this door right now. I flipped on the porch light. I undid the deadbolt, the new one, but left the chain lock engaged. I opened the door 3 inches. She was standing there, a ridiculous silhouette in the harsh glare. Still in her glittering evening gown, her hair falling out of its complicated twist, her makeup smeared from a night of whatever it was. She looked like a costume someone had left out in the rain. What is this? She hissed. What did you do to the lock? Are you insane? Your key doesn't work, I said. My voice was calm. It sounded strange to my own ears. It sounded like mine. Her face contorted, a mask of disbelief and rage. You're acting like a child. You embarrassed me tonight. Storming out like that, it was a joke. Joshua, a stupid joke. Kevin is just, he's just like that. You're overreacting. Overreacting. That was the word. Not, I'm so sorry. Not, are you okay? Not, I can't believe he did that to you. She wasn't sorry she had betrayed me. She was just annoyed that I had finally stopped playing along. The locks are changed. Melissa, I said, my voice perfectly level. You should probably find somewhere else to stay. Her jaw dropped. For a second, the rage was replaced by genuine, sputtering shock. What you? You can't do this. This is my house. 2, I'll call the police. Go ahead. I said, the house is in my name. It has been since before we were married. They'll tell you it's a civil matter. Her face went dark. You will regret this. Joshua, I swear to God, I'm calling my lawyer. You have no idea what you've just started. Yeah, I do, I said. I gently closed the door, shutting out her threats. I slid the chain lock back into place and shot the deadbolt home. The sound of it, that heavy thunk of hardened steel seating into the frame, was like a chord of music. I heard her scream my name. One more time. It was a sound full of fury. Then, I heard her stomping back to her car. The crunch of her heels on the gravel driveway. A car door slammed. An engine roared. Tires squealed on the pavement. And then, silence. I stood in the foyer for a long time, just listening. The house was finally quiet. It was the first time in 20 years I'd felt at peace. I didn't sleep. I didn't even try. I sat in my workshop until the sun came up, just smelling the wood and drinking black coffee. The anger from the night before had cooled and settled into something hard, dense, and useful. It felt like a block of iron, ready to be forged. At 8 a.m. on the dot, I picked up my phone. My fingers hovered over the number for a divorce attorney Melissa's sister had once used. No, I wasn't there yet. This wasn't about ending a marriage. This was about auditing a failed partnership. I scrolled down and hit a different number. Robert, my business lawyer for 15 years. He'd incorporated my LLC, handled my workshop lease, and drafted my supplier contracts. He picked up on the second ring, his voice already wide awake. Joshua, it's early for you. Everything all right with that shipment from Oregon? The shipment's fine. Robert, I said, I've got a different issue. I need you, and I need a forensic accountant. There was a pause. Robert was smart. He knew my voice. This isn't about wood. Is it? No, I said. It's about an audit. A hostile one. How soon can you be in the office? I'm here now, he said. Who do you need? I need the best accountant, you know. Someone who enjoys digging through trash to find receipts. I need Sarah. He paused again. Sarah Josh. She's not a bookkeeper. She's who the DA's office calls when they think a councilman is taking bribes. It's going to be expensive. And it's going to be ugly. I'm counting on it, I said. 10 am. My office or yours? Mine, he said. This is official. I showed up at Robert's high-rise office at 9:55, still wearing the wrinkled suit from the night before. I hadn't showered. I hadn't changed. I wanted to walk in smelling like the problem. Robert, a man in his late 50s, with a calm, measured presence, met me in the lobby. He didn't comment on my appearance. Sarah was already in the conference room, her laptop open, a notepad next to it with one pen. She was in her 30s, sharp, and looked like she had zero patience for small talk. She was perfect. I sat down. Robert started to speak, but I held up a hand. Before we start, I said, I want to be perfectly clear. I'm not here to talk about my feelings. I'm not here to cry about my marriage or ask for advice on counseling. I don't care about the affair. Robert and Sarah looked at each other. I'm here, I said, because I believe my company is being stolen from, and I believe my wife is the one doing it. Robert leaned back. Theft. Josh, that is a heavy word. You're talking about Melissa. You need to be 100% certain before you make an accusation like that. Am I? I said. For the last 8 years, Melissa has had an executive credit card linked directly to my primary business account. It was supposed to be for PR and marketing, client dinners, website maintenance, press kits, industry events. That was the agreement. I'm a craftsman. Robert. Not an accountant. I trusted her. I didn't look. I want you, I said, looking at Sarah. To look. Sarah finally spoke. Her voice was as precise as her appearance. Mr. Hole. What am I looking for? Discrepancies, uncategorized expenses. I want you to find patterns. I said, I want every charge over $500 for the last 3 years. I want every hotel room, every flight, every restaurant bill. I want to know who she was with. I want to know if the vendors she paid are real companies. Or just a P.O. box someone set up. I want to know if I was funding a marketing strategy. Or a lifestyle. Robert sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Josh. What happened? What set this off? I reached into my breast pocket. I pulled out the crumpled, now dry $1 bill. I smoothed it out on the polished 20-foot mahogany conference table. The three of us just stared at it. George Washington looked tired. That happened, I said. He gave that to me. And she watched him do it. The entire tone of the meeting shifted. Sarah pushed her glasses up her nose. Robert's calm demeanor evaporated, replaced by a cold, professional focus. This wasn't a domestic dispute anymore. It was a breach of contract. It was a hostile takeover. Sarah nodded once. I'll need full administrative access. Bank logins. Credit card portals. QuickBooks. Everything. I slid a single sheet of paper across the table. I'd written them all down before I'd left the workshop. Find it all. Sarah, I said. Every penny. And when she does, Robert added, his voice low, we will decide exactly what is civil and what is criminal. I stood up. I'd been there maybe 10 minutes. Thank you for your time. I turned and walked out, leaving the $1 bill sitting in the middle of that giant, expensive table, a down payment. I went home, and for the first time in 2 days, he fell asleep. The call came 2 days later. I was in the workshop, sanding the edge of that white oak table, the fine dust settling on my arm. My phone buzzed on the workbench. It was Robert. Joshua. She's done. Sarah's done. Can you come in? On my way, I said. I didn't even wipe the sawdust off my clothes. When I walked into the conference room, the atmosphere was different. It wasn't tense anymore. It was sterile, clinical. Sarah was at the head of the table, her laptop projecting onto a large screen. Robert sat to the side, his hands steepled, his face grim. Joshua. Sit down, Robert said. I sat. Sarah started without preamble. I pulled every transaction from the business account linked to that card for the last 36 months. She said, clicking a key. I also cross-referenced it with your joint personal accounts and 2 separate accounts I found opened in Melissa's name only. Using transfers from the business card, a spreadsheet filled the screen. It was a sea of numbers. But Sarah had highlighted certain lines in red. Let's skip the small stuff, she said. The client dinners for 2 at 5-star restaurants on Saturday nights. The industry research trips to Napa Valley. The team-building spa days where she was the only one on the team. She clicked again. A single, bold number appeared at the bottom of the screen. Total misappropriated funds over the last 18 months, $142,611. And change. $140,000. I didn't gasp. I didn't yell. I just stared at the number. I felt a strange, hollow calm. It was the feeling of knowing, the feeling of finally seeing the full, rotten scope of the thing. I'd been trying to build a life, and she'd been running a demolition. Sarah wasn't finished. The spending pattern is what's most revealing. She brought up another slide. Pie charts. Bar graphs. It was a breakdown. Thousands for designer clothes. Handbags that cost more than my best table saw. Leasing a luxury convertible that I'd never even seen, which she'd apparently kept parked in a garage downtown. I looked at the list, and I finally understood. This was the golden facade. It's a term I'd heard before. Narcissistic masking. It's not just about lying, it's about building an entire, perfect, glittering identity to hide the emptiness inside. Melissa wasn't just stealing from me. She was desperate. She was terrified of being seen as what she was, the wife of a simple craftsman. She needed to be Melissa, the Austin PR mogul, the innovator, the woman who had it all. And she'd used my money, my work, my substance, to build her hollow style, the contempt, the dollar bill. It all made a sick kind of sense. She had to believe I was beneath her, because if she didn't, she'd have to admit that her entire life was a fraud, funded by the very man she despised. That's the why. I murmured, mostly to myself. This, Sarah said, clicking to a new slide, is the how. A new list of transactions appeared. This was different. Not spas or steakhouses. This was a series of regular, identical payments. $5,000 every month for the last 6 months. Then, before that, $3,000 a month, all going to the same vendor, KCOMS LLC. KCOMS LLC, Sarah said, was registered in the state of Texas 9 months ago. It has no website, no public-facing address. It's a shell company. The bank account it's linked to is registered to one person. She didn't even have to say the name. I already knew. Kevin, I said. Sarah nodded. Kevin, your wife has been systematically transferring funds from your business account to her lover's personal company under the guise of strategic consulting fees. So, it wasn't just an affair. It was a conspiracy. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was a heist. They were laughing at me. Both of them. All the way to the bank. Robert, who had been silent, finally spoke. It's criminal. Josh, this is felony theft. We can go to the police right now. I just sat there, looking at the name KCOMS LLC. A piece of grit was irritating my brain. A connection that wouldn't quite click. Kevin, I said. He works with Melissa at her firm. Right. Correct. Sarah said. He's a senior director there. So why the shell company, I asked? Why not just take the money? Why this structure? I looked at Robert. Robert, pull up the file for Craftsman Commercial. Robert looked confused. Craftsman Commercial, Josh. That's your subsidiary. The small batch commercial furniture line. What does that have to do with this? Just do it. I said. A cold, dark suspicion dawning on me. We hired a new marketing firm for it about 6 months ago. A remote team to handle social media. I never met them. I just approved the contract. Who was it? Robert's eyes widened. He grabbed his own laptop and his fingers flew across the keys. The room was silent except for the sound of tapping. He stopped. He stared at his screen. Oh, my God, he whispered. He turned the laptop around. On the screen was the signed contract, approved by me, an agreement for marketing services, $3,000 a month. Retainer. The vendor KCOMS LLC. I started to laugh. It wasn't a happy sound. It was a dry, scraping, terrible laugh that came from deep in my chest. He didn't even know. Kevin, the slick, arrogant PR shark who'd thrown $1 at me, had been cashing my paychecks for 6 months. He was my employee. He was sleeping with my wife. He was stealing my money through her. And he was collecting a salary from me. All at the same time. He was taking my money from 2 different directions, and he was so arrogant, so sure of himself, that he didn't even bother to find out who owned the company that was paying him. I'd been paying him to build a brand, while he'd been paying himself to destroy my life. I stopped laughing. The cold clarity from the night of the party returned. But now it was absolute zero. It was perfect. I looked at Robert. Don't call the police. He looked at me, confused. Josh, this is a gift. This is criminal. I know, I said, but a criminal case is messy. It's public, and it's not what I want. I don't want a prosecutor to handle this. I want to handle this. I stood up. Robert, I need you to set up a Zoom meeting. A mandatory brand strategy review for the Craftsman commercial team. I want everyone on that call. And I want to be listed as the host, Joshua Ho, owner and CEO. Robert started to smile. He finally understood when he asked, tomorrow morning. I said, 10 a.m. sharp. I set up the Zoom call in my workshop. I didn't bother going to Robert's office. I wanted to be on my home turf. Surrounded by my tools and the smell of white oak, I positioned the laptop on my workbench. The massive, half-finished dining table just visible in the background. My real work. At 10 a.m. sharp. Their faces popped into the grid. Two young marketing people I didn't recognize. And Kevin. He looked relaxed. Sitting in what looked like a sterile, high-rise apartment. He was wearing a crisp polo shirt. His hair perfectly coiffed. He was sipping an espresso. He clearly hadn't made the connection. Morning. I said, my voice calm. Thanks for joining. I'm Joshua Ho, the owner of Craftsman Commercial. I'm taking a more hands-on role in our marketing strategy. So I wanted to review the last quarter. Great to finally put a face to the name. Mr. Ho, Kevin said, flashing that $1 million, utterly fake smile. We've been seeing fantastic engagement on the new line. I've seen the reports. I said, pulling up a file. Let's talk about the expense ledger. Sarah, our new comptroller, pulled these for me. Just want to make sure I understand the strategy behind these expenditures. I shared my screen. It was the KCOM's LLC expense report. I scrolled past the content creation fees, the social media monitoring costs. This all seems standard. Monthly retainer. Analytics. Fine, but I'm curious about this section. I zoomed in on the client development and entertainment budget. These dinners, I said, $3,000 at the Capitol Grill, $2,500 at Uchi. These are significant expenses. Kevin, who were we entertaining? Kevin didn't even blink. He was a professional liar. Those were crucial outreach dinners. Joshua, we were courting regional design influencers and architectural bloggers. The ROI on those relationships is long-term. It's about perception. Perception. I repeated. Got it. I scrolled down further. And this caught my eye. From the Austin Innovators Gala, a charge for $1. What was that? I watched his face on the screen. The smile wavered. Just for a second. He looked confused. $1, that must be a typo. Joshua, data entry error. I don't think it's an error. I said, leaning into the camera. I'm pretty sure it was a tip for the craftsman. I was the guest you were entertaining. Wasn't I? You handed it to me yourself? Right before you flicked it into my drink. The blood drained from Kevin's face. His tan suddenly looked like cheap paint. The two other marketing people on the call looked like they wanted to crawl through their webcams and disappear. I don't. He stammered. You didn't know. I finished for him. You didn't know who I was. You thought I was just some blue-collar husband. You didn't realize that while you were sleeping with my wife, you were also collecting my paycheck. Kevin's eyes were wide with pure, unadulterated panic. Joshua. Mr. Ho. Listen, this is a misunderstanding. Melissa's theft is a separate legal matter. I said, cutting him off. The color drained even further. This call is about your performance. You're being terminated. Effective immediately. For 3 reasons. 1, gross misuse of company funds. 2, conflict of interest. Specifically, a conspiracy to defraud the company in collusion with my wife, Melissa. And 3. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the crumpled dollar bill, and held it up to the camera. Unprofessional conduct. You can expect a call from my lawyer. Goodbye. Kevin. I ended the meeting. I sat there in the silence of my workshop. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was Balance. The ledger was being corrected. The divorce court was exactly as soulless as you'd imagine. All beige walls and bad lighting, smelling faintly of old coffee and desperation. Melissa was there, sitting next to a slick lawyer in a suit that cost more than my first truck. She was dressed in a conservative gray dress, her hair pulled back. She was aiming for a regretful victim. She wouldn't look at me. Her lawyer, Mr. Vance, was a performance artist. He painted a picture of a long-suffering wife, trapped in a passionless marriage with a disengaged, work-obsessed husband. He claimed Melissa's one-time indiscretion, he actually called it, that was a cry for help. He argued that her marketing expenses were legitimate, and that she deserved half the business, half the house, and significant spousal support. Then it was Robert's turn. Robert didn't perform. He didn't raise his voice. He just presented facts. Your Honor, he said, we're not here to debate feelings. We're here to review a balance sheet. And the balance sheet is alarming. He handed the judge the binder Sarah had prepared. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s named Judge Alani, put on her glasses and started to read. I watched her face. It went from neutral to curious to annoyed. Mr. Vance, the judge said, not looking up. Can you explain these regular $5,000 payments from the plaintiff's business account to a K-Coms LLC? Those were consulting fees. Your Honor, for a shell company, Robert interjected smoothly, owned and operated by Mrs. Hull's lover, Mr. Kevin, the same lover, I might add, who was also on Mr. Hull's payroll at a subsidiary. We have the termination for cause paperwork right here. The judge looked up. She stared at Melissa. Melissa turned a fascinating shade of gray. And these expenses, the judge continued. A convertible lease, handbags, 7 trips to Napa. You're claiming these were for PR for a custom furniture company. Vance stammered. Client perception is... The judge slammed the binder shut. Client perception is not felony theft. Counselor, the evidence here is overwhelming. Mrs. Hull has engaged in a systematic pattern of fraud and embezzlement totaling $142,000. She turned to Melissa. You didn't just have an affair. Mrs. Hull, you committed a crime. You stole from your husband to finance your lover. The verdict was swift. It was a massacre. Spousal support is denied. All claims against Mr. Hull's business. Craftsman commercial are dismissed. The marital home, being premarital property, remains with Mr. Hull. Full custody of the minor children is granted to Mr. Hull. Furthermore, a judgment is entered against Mrs. Hull for the full $142,000, to be repaid with interest. Melissa was openly sobbing now, the regretful victim mask melting away to reveal the raw panic underneath. Your Honor, Vance said, standing up. My client. Her transportation. She has no assets. The judge looked at her notes. Mr. Hull has generously agreed to sign over the title to one of the family's vehicles. Melissa looked up, a tiny flicker of hope in her eyes. Mrs. Hull will retain ownership, the judge read, of the 2009 Toyota Corolla. The blue one. The one Mr. Hull was planning to donate to charity next month. I heard a sound from the back of the courtroom. It was my son, Ryan, trying and failing to stifle a laugh. I just nodded at the judge. I picked up my briefcase. The ledger was balanced. You'd think a divorce trial like that would be kept quiet. But this is Austin. It's a big city that still acts like a small town. The story spread. First, it was just whispers in the legal community. Then, it hit the business circles. Did you hear about Joshua Hull, the furniture guy? My story, it turned out, was better than gossip. It was a legend. The $1 tip. The shell company. The Zoom firing. The Corolla. It was a story about substance versus style. About authenticity versus perception. And in a city choking on tech startups and PR spin, a story about a quiet craftsman winning, and winning big, was the one everyone wanted to root for. My business. It exploded. It wasn't just orders. It was pilgrimages. People drove in from Dallas, from Houston, just to come to my workshop. They didn't just want to buy a table. They wanted to shake my hand. They wanted to see the place where real things were still made. They wanted to talk about integrity. They'd look around, see the tools, smell the cedar, and they'd nod, like they'd confirmed something important about the world. I read about what happened. A rancher from West Texas told me, commissioning a 200-pound mesquite desk. A man's work should be his bond. Glad to see you reminded people of that. My order list, once a comfortable 3 months, stretched to 6, then 9. I had to hire 3 new apprentices, all young, eager kids who wanted to learn how to build something, not just ideate it. I was in the shop about 2 months after the trial, sketching a new design. When the idea came to me, all this pain, all this clarity, it shouldn't just be a memory. It should be a product. I created a new line. I called it the Loyalty Series. It wasn't like my other work. This was personal. I used the rarest woods: walnut, aged cherry, white oak, and the most complex joinery. These were statement pieces. Desks that felt like fortresses. Tables that felt like foundations. Each piece was built to last 100 years. They were for people who understood that what you build your life on matters. And on every single piece, in the corner, I set a small, custom-made brass plaque. It didn't have my name. It didn't have a date. It just had 3 simple words, burned into the metal. Don't get burned. They sold out in a week. The wait list is now 2 years long. This morning, I woke up at 5. The house was quiet. Ryan's off at college. The twins are at a sleepover. And Grace is at a robotics tournament. It's just me. I walked into my workshop as the first light was just starting to turn the sky from black to a deep, bruised purple. I made a pot of coffee, the good stuff, and stood by the open bay doors, breathing in the cool. Don't bail. I thought about Melissa. I heard she was working for some small PR firm now, living in a condo she couldn't really afford. I heard Kevin was facing fraud charges in another state. I took a sip of my coffee. The ledger was balanced. The noise was gone. The sun started to break over the Austin hills, casting long, golden shadows across my workbench, illuminating the fine layer of sawdust in the air. It looked like gold dust. It was real. I took another sip, and for the first time in a long, long time, I felt completely and totally at peace. Thank you for listening to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Also, leave a comment below to share your thoughts on what happened. Take care.